How many books would you say you read in a typical year? If you said at least one, then congratulations, because you read more than almost half of the adults in the US. Just one. Just one. The National Endowment for the Arts did a survey in 2022 that showed that only 51.9% of adults in the US read or listened to at least one book in the previous year. Now, the US ranks 36th in literacy in the world, with 79% of adults being able to read, which is already not the greatest number, but worse than that is that 54% of adults can only read at a 6th grade level. More than half of adults can only read at a middle school reading level. This is not good. This is not good for multiple reasons. Low literacy has a very strong correlation with poverty, which is a horrible vicious cycle, because if you're living in poverty, you're not going to have the time to devote to reading. If you can't read, it's harder to get more education, harder to get a higher paying job. If you're living in poverty and you have kids, you're not going to have the time to read to your kids. Your kids are going to fall behind in school. Your kids are going to not be able to get a higher education because of that, and then not get a higher paying job because of that. And then it's just a vicious cycle. Not being able to read well can also be really dangerous in situations like prescription medications. Not being able to read the instructions accurately can be dangerous, if not fatal. Reading's also really important to help relieve stress. It's just a fun hobby, frankly, but also it's a brain workout. And working out your brain in lots of different ways can help lower the risks of things like dementia and Alzheimer's. So get your brain working. I've tried to say this so many times, so I'm going to just read it directly from my screen. Reading fiction allows us to understand perspectives different from our own, which can improve our real life relationships and understanding of other people's experiences. It also helps with empathy, because you're reading about and relating to these fictional characters, and our brains don't really know the difference. If you're spending a whole lot of time with a character, your brain just kind of interprets that as a person. So it applies to real life then too. If you can't read, that's nothing to be ashamed of. That's not your fault someone failed to teach you, but it's never too late to learn. Access to adult literacy programs varies depending on where you are, but the first step is to go to your local library, ask your librarian. Librarians are there to help you. Libraries are great. They have so many resources, but your librarian will know best what resources exist in your area to help you learn. So there's that. We're gonna go into the rest of the video that's about book recommendations and stuff. So moving forward in the video, we're assuming that everyone can read or listen. This is a hot take for some people. I have nothing against audiobooks. I personally don't listen to a lot of audiobooks, but I think audiobooks still count as reading. It's a different experience, obviously, than physically reading a book, but you're still experiencing the same book. And some people can't read because they were never taught to read, or they can't read because they can't see the book. So audiobooks absolutely count in my book. Getting back into reading or getting into reading in the first place can feel really daunting because there's a lot of books. Where do you even start? But my personal advice is to start with either books you've already read before or books written for children, like middle grade novels. I specifically really recommend reading some middle grade novels because they're short, the language is super easy, so they're gonna be a really quick read. Then the issue is, what books for middle schoolers are still interesting and engaging for adult readers? Well, lucky for you, I have a list. First recommendation, the Percy Jackson series by Riordan. There are 5 books in the original series, and then there's 5 more books in the second series, and then there's a third series that I think has 5 more books. I haven't read those. And then there's several other books. The Rick Riordan universe is large, so if you really like them, endless books, practically. But just the original 5 books of the Percy Jackson series, fantastic. I read these originally in middle school, and then I reread them when I was 19 or 20, and just as good. I've been thrown back into my Percy Jackson obsession because it's a TV series now, so at some point in the next year or two, I'll probably reread them again. Second recommendation is The Colors of Madeline trilogy by Jaclyn Moriarty. I read the first 2 books in 8th grade, and then this one sat on my bookshelf for like 9 years. And then I finally reread them all a year ago. And fantastic. They're like a modern fantasy thing with parallel universes, and there's so much fun world building and so much good foreshadowing. And so every little detail that you think is just kind of thrown in there for fun, it all means something. It all means something. Every little twist, you're like, I should have seen it coming! Highly recommend. I never see anyone talk about these books, so I'm starting it. Everyone, get on it. Read these. I need someone to talk about it with. Number 3, The Princess Academy by Shannon Hale. This one is also a trilogy, but the first book is the best, and the first book works as a standalone book too. I've maybe read this book more than I've read any other book. It is so good. And part of that is probably just because it's so nostalgic for me. I read it for the first time when I was 8 or 9, but I read it most recently like 2 or 3 years ago. Just as good. Just as good. Okay, my next recommendation is the Hunger Games trilogy. Now, these ones aren't technically written for middle schoolers, but myself and a lot of people I know read them in middle school because they're not particularly difficult books to read, so you can understand them, but they're much better as an adult. They were fantastic when I read them when I was 13, and they have gotten better and better every single time I read them. And I think they also get increasingly relevant every year. And there's 2 prequels now too. And the movie for this one comes out in November. These are my favorite books in the world. This is my annotated set, and they are, I guess you can't see when I'm flipping through it at 95 million miles an hour, but my annotated set, I've written in here a lot. I definitely like to have multiple copies of my favorite books. Normally, I'm very pro buying less things. You don't need that many things. You don't need multiples of the same thing. But if it's your favorite books, you get a pass. You can have as many of those as you want. So with that in mind, here is one of my copies of The Hobbit. I love Lord of the Rings so much. They're my other favorite series besides The Hunger Games. And The Hobbit is a lot easier than Lord of the Rings. It's not the easiest book to read because it is almost 100 years old and the language is different, but it was written with a younger audience in mind than Lord of the Rings. So it started out as a bedtime story for his son, who nitpicked about the details enough that Tolkien finally was like, okay, I'll write it down. And my final recommendation of books meant for kids that are easy but still good is the Inkheart trilogy. I only own the first book, but I read this in 4th grade, I think, and then I reread it my senior year of high school, and it was great again. I need to reread it again, honestly. I'm a big rereader. If you haven't picked that up yet, I know what I like. I have a rule for myself where if I want to reread a book, I have to read as many new books as the books I want to reread. I don't always hold to that. Sometimes I reread a lot more books. I have favorites. That's why I also have multiple copies of them. I know what I like. Okay, on to more book recommendations. I have a lot. I don't think I read a lot because my bar is really high because I see book influencers on social media who read upwards of 100 books a year. My goal is 25 books a year. So that seems low based on what I see, but it probably seems high to other people. So it's all subjective. I read a decent number of books a year and I try to read relatively widely, but all I ever want to be doing is reading Lord of the Rings. But you can't just, like I said, I try to limit my rereading so I read other books, but I just really want to be reading Lord of the Rings at all times. So with that in mind, my first recommendation is the Lord of the Rings series. They're so good. I read them for the first time between the ages of 12 and 14. They took me forever, and they were so difficult to read, but then I read them again with my adult brain, with a decade more of reading experience, and they were so good and so fun. And if you want me to make a video about Lord of the Rings, sound off in the comments and I will do it, because really all I ever want to be doing is reading Lord of the Rings, watching Lord of the Rings, talking about Lord of the Rings, watching Lord of the Rings edits on TikTok. These are my entire world. We're gonna keep with the theme of my favorite things. John Green is my favorite author. I have not been disappointed by any of his books. This one's signed. Wow, isn't that beautiful? That says John Green. I have an ongoing problem of reading a book, being like, that was the best thing I've ever read. I need to find other people talking about this book, and then going online to look for people talking about the book and finding nothing. And that was very much the case with Flame in the Mist and Smoke in the Sun by Renee Ahdieh. I read these, I think, 2 summers ago, and they were some of the best books I've read in years. And then I discovered that nobody on the internet is talking about these books. Seemingly, I am the only person to read these books, which is really upsetting because I want to talk about them with somebody. They were so good. They're loosely a Mulan retelling set in feudal Japan, low magic fantasy world, beautiful. There's 2 side books too. I haven't read those yet, but I'm going to. Next, Lonely Planets, The Natural Philosophy of Alien Life by David Grinspoon. Now, this one's about the ongoing search for extraterrestrial life and kind of the varying public attitudes towards that. And when did this come out? 2003. So the science is very outdated, but the philosophy still stands. And this was really interesting. It was a really interesting read. It's very dense. It took me a really long time because the pages are like solid blocks of text and there's a lot of science. But I'm also a big proponent of reading books that are too hard for you. I'm not scientifically smart enough to understand most of what went on in this book, but it was still interesting. Next up, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. The language is very flowery, but if you can look past that, it's beautiful and silly and fun. I read this in a weekend while my family was staying in a Victorian mansion, so it was very fitting. It was very fun. I got to sit in like the mansion's library. If you're into poetry, Lazarus Rises, amongst other things, by Berklie Novak-Stolz, is a beautiful poetry collection about grief that she wrote after her brother committed suicide. And I've read it multiple times, and I literally recommend it to everyone I know. It is so good. She also talks a lot about the show Supernatural, so if you have seen Supernatural, that's an added bonus with this book, but you don't need to know anything about Supernatural to enjoy the book. I love this book. My mom loves this book. You would love this book too. It's so beautiful. My final recommendations for today are The Song of Achilles and Circe by Madeline Miller. They're both like separate books. You don't have to read both of them, but they're both kind of retellings of Greek myths. Fantastic. This one's super popular. Everybody talks about this one. I don't see as many people talk about this, but they're both popular. Rightly so. I've written songs about both of these books. That's how good they are. I don't write a song unless it's serious. So highly recommend both of these. This is my favorite book of all time. As for what I'm currently reading, I am the kind of person who often reads more than one book at once. So right now I am reading The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson and The Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes. This one is the first book in a 5-book series, and it's also the shortest of the 5 books. This is 1,001 pages. When I finish this, it will be the longest book I have ever read. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. This is the first sitting and talking video I've done in quite a while, so if it was awkward, I apologize. I'm not used to talking to the camera, but if you liked it, please leave a thumbs up and let me know if you want more videos like this. I will gladly talk about books. I will talk about books all you want me to, so tell me if you want to see more, and I will provide. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, and please leave a comment letting me know what you're reading lately, if you have any book recommendations you'd like to add to the list. I have all of my sources about the reading statistics at the beginning of the video linked in the description below, so you can go check those out if you're interested in more information. I also have links to all of my social media, my merch, my music, my Patreon, if any of that interests you. That's also in the description box. This is Wendy. This is the photo wall that is up too high to be part of the video background. Thanks for being here. Love you. Bye.